Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. One housekeeping thing: if anybody's having technical difficulties, you can message Anna Rao in Spaces, and we'll get you helped out. I want to welcome everyone to the first event in our three-part series on the path to equity in Indiana Tech. We are thrilled to have. We had 250 people registered just for today's session on anti-racism in leadership. Our panelists, moderator, and sponsors are with me on the screen right now. I'm Mike Langelier, CEO of TechPoint. TechPoint is a nonprofit started and led by the tech community. We serve as the nucleus for the tech community and a turbocharger for its growth. We are mission driven to make Indianapolis region the #1 tech ecosystem among US mid-sized cities, because we know that doing so can create equitable economic opportunities and prosperity for all of you and for future generations. So we build talent pipelines and programs like the Extern program. We attract venture capital firms and support startups and scale-ups. We tell the tech community stories at techpointindex.com. And we nurture and celebrate our community at the Mira Awards and a lot more, which gets us to today. In the wake of George Floyd's killing, many organizations took stock and issued statements. TechPoint was one, and I shared our 5 commitments from the Mira Awards stage, 5 things that we would do through our programs and board leadership that would boost diversity, representation, and inclusion. But as a community, we can do so much more. When people describe what makes our tech ecosystem special, the response is inevitably about the community and the people in it. We're connected, supportive, welcoming, and I think we'd historically say inclusive. But we're in a time when we need to challenge that. Are we inclusive? Are we equitable? We're certainly not sufficiently diverse. I know I've been challenged as a human, a citizen, a father, and an organizational leader through this time. Growing up, colorblindness was the purported goal. Now it's clear that colorblindness isn't getting the job done, and more pointed, explicit anti-racism effort is required. But as leaders of organizations and even families, what is expected and how do we do it? I know that I'm on that journey, and I look forward to learning right alongside all of you. This series is possible thanks to a few organizations who stepped up to support as sponsors. One is Tango. With its acquisition a few years ago, local darling Moby became Tango, combining to create a global powerhouse in the IT lifecycle management space, helping customers pay their bills, process their orders, manage their inventory, and find savings in their global telecom, mobile, and cloud technology environments. A big thank you also goes to Comcast Business. Support that we'll hear from them later on in the series, but directly, but support them with your internet, phone, and cable needs as they support this series and our tech community. And a big thank you also goes to Faegre Drinker, who for years has been a go-to law firm for our tech community and is the other presenting partner for this 3-part event series. And it's my pleasure to introduce Maria Lewis from Faegre Drinker. She's a Harvard Law grad and a sought-after labor and employment attorney with a reputation for solving challenging employment issues, reducing legal risks, and helping clients improve their workplace cultures. Maria is also the firm's chief diversity officer and champion for the firm's overall diversity and inclusion initiatives. Welcome, Maria. Thanks for joining.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you to TechPoint and all of our presenters today, and those who are participating online this morning. Listen, it's a difficult time for all of us. 2020 has presented to us many challenges, but where we see challenges, there's also opportunity. And I am proud to say that TechPoint and many others in the tech industry are taking the lead to say, well, we know that there are challenges going on around us in society, but we want to be part of moving to bigger and better. And when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and equity, I think that while it impacts all of us in different ways, it does impact all of us. And so where does it start? It starts on many different fronts, but having a conversation around anti-racism is very important. Mike, I couldn't agree with you more. We used to talk about color blindness as if we could not see, right? So we can see, and we know that there are differences, but where and how do we challenge each other to celebrate those differences and use it to the better good? So I'm excited for this morning, and I thank you for the opportunity to serve as one of the presenting sponsors. And I look forward to hearing from all of the experts and having an engaged conversation. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks so much, Maria. And thanks again to the teams at Fagery Drinker, Comcast Business, and Tango for supporting this event and this series. The journey to progress, like most things, starts with leadership. Thus, our topic today. We've deliberately selected panelists representing a variety of company types and sizes, small companies to Fortune 500s, and individuals from a variety of races and roles, HR to Chief Diversity Officer to CEO. And we've selected a moderator, someone with expertise in the nuances of DE&I efforts to help guide the direction of this series and the discussion herein. To serve as moderator and partner with us on this series, we've selected Demetria Miles-McDonald, the founder and CEO of Decide Diversity, a company focused on increasing the presence and effectiveness of underrepresented groups in the workplace, specifically in leadership positions. Demetria helps expose leaders to stereotypes and biases that prevent qualified people from reaching their highest potential, and she specializes in bringing the experiences of marginalized people to the forefront to better understand and also utilize the strengths that they bring to the workplace. She has been instrumental in designing all 3 sessions that are part of this series and putting in a lot of her own time and expertise to create a powerful series that will offer you some valuable insights and strategies you can take with you back to your own companies. Demetria's passion for achieving equality for the marginalized, oppressed, and underrepresented is her life's work. We're thrilled to partner with her and to have her with us as our moderator today. Thank you, Demetria. And I'll turn things over to you and our featured panelists now.
Thank you so very much, Mike. I am ecstatic to be here and really excited to dive into this discussion today with our panelists. I can tell you all, based on our previous conversations with the panelists, that it is going to be an amazing discussion. So get your pens, get your pad ready, and take some notes, because there's going to be a lot for you to take back to your organizations today. So let's get started. First, I'd like each of our panelists to introduce yourselves, starting with Marsha.
Good morning, everybody. I am Dr. Marsha McGriff from Ball State University, where I serve as the Associate Vice President for Inclusive Excellence. I am so excited to be with you all today. I am, it's always good to step outside of your sector or your area. And so I'm thrilled to be on the panel with my colleagues. And I just want to thank Demetria and Miranda and the support that we received in preparation for this phenomenal panel today.
Thank you so much. Miranda, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I am Miranda Nicholson, SVP of HR at Formstack, a local software as a service business. I've been with the company for a little over 7 years, and in my time have grown the HR function from just me to 8 people. And last year we hired a diversity and inclusion recruiter. And so my learning journey is still ongoing, but very happy to be here and participate and learn from others.
Great, thank you for being here. Aman?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Aman Brar, CEO of Jobvite. Been on quite the learning journey as well. I feel really privileged that I get to work with so many talent acquisition teams across the country, where it's fun to learn, not just from what we're trying to do internally at Jobvite, but from our customer base. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. And last but not least, Eric.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, TechPoint, for setting this up and having this opportunity. I look forward to interacting with all the panelists here. So I'm Eric Thomas with Genesys. We are the largest global supplier of contact center software in the world, servicing customers who in the customer experience market. I've been with Genesys for about a couple of years now, maybe year and a half, 2.5 years, but I've been in this role as of July 1st. And it has been an amazing journey so far, learning a lot and looking forward to how much we can learn on this session as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So before we dive into this discussion, I'd like to define what it means to be anti-racist. So for some of you, this may be a term that you've never heard before, or that you have heard very little, have a very little understanding of. So I want to ensure that as we go about this conversation, that there's some common understanding as we engage in this conversation. So you might have heard this term from Dr. Ibram Kendi, who is the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I think that he says it best. What's the problem with being not racist? It is a claim that signifies neutrality. I am not racist, but neither am I aggressively against racism. But there is no neutrality in the racism struggle. The opposite of racist isn't not racist, it is anti-racist. Dr. Beverly Tatum, she's the author of the book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, which is another great resource if you're looking for some things to take with you after today's session. She has a really great analogy for anti-racism that I'd like to share with you. She said that I sometimes visualize the ongoing cycle of racism as a moving walkway at the airport. Active racist behavior is equivalent to walking fast on the conveyor belt. Passive racist behavior is equivalent to standing still on the walkway. No overt effort is being made, but the conveyor belt moves the bystanders along to the same destination as those who are actively walking. Some of the bystanders may feel the motion of the conveyor belt, see the active racist ahead of them, and choose to turn around. But unless they are walking actively in the opposite direction at a speed faster than the conveyor belt, unless they are being actively anti-racist, they will find themselves carried along with the others. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask our panel, what does it look like to be anti-racist in a leadership position? And Eric, we'll start with you.
It's a great question. When you think about the makeup of most companies, particularly in corporate America, it's still a very much well-dominated white male environment, particularly at the leadership level. And to me, being anti-racist at a leadership level, it starts with the ability to harness that privilege to work in more of an ally type role, and maybe even be going beyond ally. At Genesys, we like to use the word being a co-conspirator. That's kind of the language that we've kind of socialized among our leadership team as we get their heads around what it means to be anti-racist or anti-anything against any of the isms that contribute to marginalization of certain individuals. I think it also means you no longer can be silent, on issues, whether it's social issues, things that are happening outside the workplace. I think for so long, business leaders have been just focused on driving and making business decisions and really focus on one key stakeholder, which is a shareholder. And I think those days of that is passing us. And progressive leadership tells us that you have to consider other stakeholders. You got to consider your customers, of course, but also your employees and your communities, right? And that means that as things occur around you that's outside the workplace, it may drive you to make more principled decisions and not so many business decisions, right? So you can no longer be silent. You have to be in the game, and you have to be actively working to eradicate systemic racism. It's no longer acceptable just to say, we have policies or whatever it is, or to be silent. I think that's what it means in terms of leadership today.
Thank you for that. And when you were talking about being silent, it reminded me of a common phrase that we use: your silence is your complicity. And so I love that you brought that up. Marsha, what are your thoughts?
For me, I think the action of being anti-racist starts with you. It starts from within your soul, your spirit. And as a leader, the ability to be introspective and reflective is really critical in this work. So interrogate you first before you can bring those energies out to the people who you lead. So interrogate your beliefs, interrogate your actions, interrogate your activities. There's lots of models to do that. And so once you begin to acknowledge that, hey, well, I may be kind of acting a little racist, or I might have not been my best self in a specific encounter, then you can begin the action orientation of helping others to move to an action, to an anti-racist stance. And that is where you begin to look at who's not at the table. You know, what voices are missing in this discourse? And why are they not here? And then you begin to challenge systems, policies, and procedures. So are there systemic things in place? Are there policies in place? Are there things that are structurally in place that are keeping certain voices from the table? So one, start with yourself. Interrogate yourself, interrogate your beliefs, interrogate your actions. And I'm telling you, y'all, it's exhaustive. I mean, it's like you step out of the door, you're like, oh, I got to put on my best good self right now. And so once you can do that, then you can bring others along with you toward this orientation, an action orientation of being anti-racist.
Thank you so much for that. You know, one of the things that I love about what you just said is asking questions and being curious. I think that's one of the most powerful tools that we have in our toolbox is our ability to dig deep and ask those really hard questions of ourselves and of others. So I love that. Thank you so much. Miranda, Aman, any other thoughts you'd like to add?
I think that there's something that should be said about that from a white person's perspective, which is you have to recognize that you're not a savior, you're an ally, right? And how are you bringing people into conversations? How are you making other leaders comfortable with being uncomfortable? How are we objectively looking at the barriers that people of color have to being hired, to being promoted, to having a seat at that table, and recognizing those barriers and something that we say pretty frequently at Formstack is there's a readiness to learn and there's a readiness to act. And to go kind of piggyback on what Marsha said, I think you have to be ready to learn first before you jump in there, because that's where you get coined as the white savior, right? I don't know anything. I'm going to go in there and I'm just going to do a bunch of stuff and mess a bunch of things up and ask for forgiveness. And I don't think that that's the right way to approach that, regardless of what the makeup of your leadership team looks like, because the groups that you're impacting will see that and recognize it as inauthentic.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Aman, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I guess maybe the quick point I'd make is I think, as leaders in organizations, it's really critical that we, we're just accountable, right? So I'll give you an example. When a hiring manager in the hustle and bustle of meeting their objectives and deliverables, and they're making a hire, and we're not reaching out to, communities to diversify our workforce, or, to find that young Black professional that can make a difference. While as a leader, you might not be responsible for that, but you're accountable to it, right? And so really kind of facing your accountability as a leader, that there's all these opportunities in our organizations every single day. And it's really easy to say, I can't do it all. But the point is, no one's asking you to do it all as a leader, right? We're asking you to be accountable as leaders and to set the context for your organization and to measure impact in appropriate ways. And so I think sometimes we get a little caught up in, as in leadership, with the difference between responsibility and accountability on these issues. And I really hope that as leaders, we all feel very accountable and don't get so caught up in what are we personally responsible for or not responsible for in any given day.
Thank you for that clarification. I think that's, really important for us to make and to determine, where do we stand day by day? Each decision that we make, are we being accountable for our actions? Miranda, I'd like to start with you this time with this next question, and then the other panelists, feel free to jump in. What challenges have you faced in your role as you've become an anti-racist leader?
Yeah, the biggest lesson that I've learned through some pretty uncomfortable, and we'll call them teary conversations, is having grace and patience with people who may be on a different path or journey to becoming anti-racist. It's my background. I grew up the minority in a lot of the schools that I went to and the communities that I lived in. And so from a journey perspective, I felt I had a little bit of a leg up because I was immersed in some of that. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I definitely had a lot to recognize, but I think I found myself angry with people who it didn't click for like it clicked for me. And that was really hard because it's hard to feel like you have to drag people along to want equity for all. And that's not necessarily the case. Some people, they need to investigate and they need to learn and they need their own methods to do that. But recognizing that and allowing for that space for a person to do that and not judge them was definitely a challenge that I had to work through.
Yeah, I think I'll piggyback a little bit on what Miranda was saying. I think the other thing is we have to be careful when we're having these dialogues to create a safe space that allow folk to really contribute in a genuine way, right? I can remember just after the brutal murder of Brother Floyd, the number of phone calls I received from former colleagues who were leaders in other companies trying to understand how to engage, knowing that they needed to do something and say something, but being very cautious about saying the wrong thing or misstepping or having a mishap. And, I really encourage them to be courageous in that, to jump in and let your heart kind of guide you. If your heart's in the right place, I think the majority of the times it'll be received in a positive way, even if you say the wrong thing. It's something as simple as, can I say Black or do I say African American? I mean, these are the types of questions that I was getting. And, I also encouraged a number of individuals in my own network, because there was others that was receiving that same phone call, is, don't be so harsh, right? I mean, if folk are reaching out, that means that they're seeking knowledge, they're seeking a path of resolve, right? If you start shaming folk, then that doesn't help the conversation either. So at Genesys, what we do is we make sure that we allow that safe space. I get the phone call, I can hear the hesitancy in the voice, and I stop them right then. I say, yep, don't worry about it. Safe space, just speak your mind, we'll work through it, because I get what your intention is, right? And I think that's also important.
I think for me, the biggest lesson that I learned in this journey is how much I don't know. And I've learned that being afraid to make mistakes is the death knell to this work. Having courage is critical. Having courage to speak out, find your voice. As Eric mentioned, in those safe and brave spaces, and being able to call out things when you notice them. And so going back to being afraid to make mistakes, I think that a lot of us don't know when to insert ourselves. You're waiting for the sun to shine at the right angle, the right lane to open up to go, okay, I'm going to insert myself, or I'm going to have my courageous voice. But any step is a good step. It really, really is. We all can't be Adam Vinatieri and kick it through the uprights. I'm in Indianapolis right now. Adam's, he's on injured reserve. But sometimes if we were to put a football in front of ourselves, we just kick it 2 feet and be like, yes. So in other words, don't bite off more than you can chew. do the little things that you can possibly do to move the work forward. So if it's a small step, then pat yourself on the back. And as you're growing and moving in the direction toward anti-racism, bringing others along with you, celebrate the small successes. Sometimes we can get so fixated on the uprights that we forget the small and wonderful things that we do towards this work every day.
Yeah, thank you for that. One of my principles is progress, not perfection. So as long as we keep moving forward, no one's asking us to be perfect. They're just asking us to get better. Aman, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think this question of being an anti-racist leader, I feel like I'm trying to become an anti-racist leader every day, right? There's so much work to be done, but I think well said. I think one of the things I find often is when you engage in these conversations, we can personalize things very quickly. So you might hear another leader say, yeah, but I'm not a racist. It's like, yeah, but you know what? We're not even talking about you right now. Like literally, we're not talking about you, right? Like, so kind of redirecting the conversation to become such a personal topic. And how do we, that's one of the initial responses I think we find oftentimes. And so the thing I'd encourage us to think about is, as capable as leaders are, people are, I've really found that facilitated conversations, no matter where you are on the spectrum of anti-racism, as an organization is incredibly helpful because there's just a lot that needs to be put out on the table to redirect the conversation to a constructive place. And so I just encourage you all, at any level of your organization and talk to your companies about, facilitated conversations. I cannot, it's so valuable to kind of have someone that's just slightly adjacent to your organization helping you talk through these things. And so I just encourage everyone to think about that.
Awesome, thank you. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about what you're doing within your organizations. So, what strategies or tactics have worked for your organization and which ones maybe haven't worked so well? Let's see. Aman, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so we through kind of our all hands sessions, just having kind of broad company-based dialogue. I think it's really important. I think what doesn't work is don't assume that your young Black professional wants to be the leader of your D&I community and team, right? So I think that is a mistake we see our customers make and my friends make. And I think, what I would articulate is that open palm approach, right? So, hey, look, we're having this conversation as an organization. We intend to do the good work, right? And so we're gonna, the typical kind of progress. So we're gonna start with listening. We're gonna, enable our teams as a company. So we're doing it together, not just the leadership team. And I would say it's that open palm approach that really does work. And you'll be really surprised at the people that show up and that wanna, be a part of the solution. I think so many broad and diverse conversations, happen. And it's interesting because we are facilitating conversations for our customers, but we're also using facilitation for ourselves because of just so many of the varied perspectives and the need to get everything kind of out on the table. I think it's valuable for me to participate sometimes. I also think it's valuable for me not to be in the meeting sometimes. And so just to make sure that we're really, checking that everything's being put out there. But I do think that the mistake of, I'll pick on this example. I see it happen, kind of asking your Black recruiter how the diversity hiring is going, right? And they're like, why did you ask me that question? You know what I mean? Like, isn't that a broader question? So I think just really making sure we don't tokenize, right? And really think about these questions broadly. So I'd say what doesn't work is tokenizing and assuming where someone stands on their own journey on these things. So.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Eric, what are you all doing over there at Genesys?
So, we're pretty early in our journey here at Genesys. Company just celebrated its 30th anniversary a couple of weeks ago, but for the first time this year, we're more intentional and forward thinking with our diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And so it's a bit experimental at the moment. But I don't want to say that we're not intentional. We're intentionally starting with the workplace. So we're looking, it starts with kind of trying to establish a common language around diversity type definitions. What does it mean to be, what does unconscious biases look like? What are microaggressions? What does it mean to be an ally, right? So you start getting folks' head around the language itself and the workplace with the intent towards driving, a more inclusive environment? How do we teach our leaders to be inclusive leaders? How do we teach them to lead inclusive environments, right? So there's education. So we started there. We started with the workplace, and that was very intentional. And now we're moving into a lot of the workforce work that has to be done. And setting a baseline of understanding, the representation across different groups, gender and globally, and race and ethnicity in the U.S., and what work has to be done there, given what the benchmarks in the industry are telling us. And I think as we do the work, one of the things that I think I'm finding is the challenge of competing with Zoom fatigue. Not to call out Zoom particular, but the fatigue of being behind these video calls, for the past year, and what has been a result of the pandemic, the mental fatigue of it all, and the change management that intersects with that mental fatigue from the work that you have to do from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint. How do you find that right balance? How do the change management piece is it's enough for our employees with everything they're having to take on now. Now you're pushing all these new concepts on them, but you can't afford not to let up, right? Because it's so critical. So I think finding that delicate balance is one of the things that we're working through. The responses are pretty favorable from the organization. There's a groundswell of enthusiasm for the work that we're doing. A lot of volunteerism of wanting to be a part of the work. But finding that delicate balance at this time is really critical.
Yeah, you bring up a really great point. With a lot of people working from home, how we implement initiatives surrounding inclusion and equity has changed, because we're not in the office, and we're having to communicate with one another virtually. And I know from a lot of my clients, it's meant that they've had to make additional phone calls or additional points of contact with their team, and not just around how's work going, but how are you as a person? How are you managing working from home with kids, with I know for myself, if I see a load of laundry that needs to get done, I'm going to stop what I'm doing to tend to that load of laundry, and it messes up your entire workday. So we're having to think about what it means to be inclusive and equitable, and what aspects of diversity are really important during this pandemic. So I appreciate you for bringing that up. Miranda, Marsha, any other thoughts? What's happening within your organizations?
I think it's really important to say this as the HR person in the room. It is, from an organizational perspective, it is not HR's job to own this initiative. It is a leadership, leadership should own this. HR can certainly, come alongside and help, but there's a lot of pressure, I will say, when you expect your HR team to own diversity, equity, and inclusion in an organization. And so I would say that's one thing that we were really insistent on at the beginning of all of this, before we made a statement, when we were having difficult leadership conversations, sitting with leaders and saying, this can't just be me and my team, it has to be all of us around this table. I think too, it is really important what Aman said before about accountability. Part of that is, on my team, we have a diversity recruiter, and that was with intention. I wanted someone on my team every day waking up thinking about, how do I make this a more diverse workforce? How do I make it more inclusive? How do I take a look at our processes and what we're doing, and evaluate that at a persona level? If this person's applying, would they want to work here? And what on earth will we do when we increase our diversity? And so that's where the belonging comes in. I think it's really important to have someone at a leadership level thinking about every day about diversity and inclusion. And it's really important to have someone on an HR team that's thinking about diversity and inclusion every day. I think that partnership is essential for any progress to be made within an organization.
And I would completely agree with that. establishing the ethos and the expectation around inclusive excellence or diversity, equity, and inclusion, and having a plan has really been important for us. But as Miranda noted, having it just kind of isolated to one group as the responsible party has not been successful from my experience in other organizations. Having the buy-in and commitment at the highest level has been really critical to our success. And having a plan, kind of going back to that, we have an inclusive excellence plan at Ball State that has 6 goals and intentional steps within each of those goals to actualize inclusive excellence on our campus and in our community. So really quickly, they are recruitment, retention, rewards and recognition, inclusive excellence training, development, and curriculum, creating a culture and climate of inclusion, and then inclusive policies, procedures, and infrastructure. And so what are those intentional action steps? Who's responsible for them? What are the timelines for those? What are the resources required, human and financial? So being very specific about that and holding folks accountable, as Aman noted, is really, really critical. And I think for us, we've moved the needle significantly because of those types of strategies.
Thank you for that. And, Marsha, you mentioned something at the beginning of your response, and that was getting senior leaders on board, getting their buy-in. What were some things that you did in the beginning of this process to get leaders on board?
I walked into a situation where the office had been realigned under the Office of the President. And when I interviewed, the president of the university, Jeffrey Mearns, said, "I am the CDO. I am the Chief Diversity Officer." I was like, okay, I see you. All right. So what a space to walk in and have someone to say, I am responsible for inclusive excellence on this campus. And so to be at the table with someone with that type of vision and focus, it's not hard to get in lockstep with that foundation. And so I think leaders who take ownership of this as their own personal mission and ethos will establish a culture where everyone else will fall in line. And it's incredibly powerful for, and our president is a white male, to make that type of a pronouncement, an expectation to our campus and our community.
Demetria, I would agree with Marsha. We had a very similar experience here at Genesys with our CEO. He's a year and a half in. I mentioned earlier, it's a 30-year company, but we have a new CEO that's about 18 months in, and he brings a totally different set of value systems and perspectives. And, he has been a key driver at, ensuring that we create and establish a diversity, equity, and inclusion infrastructure in the company. And, so that helps with getting other leadership on board. But I will tell you that the reality is you still have to push. You still have to push, right? It is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You have to fight for mindset. You have to fight for competing priorities. When you think about introducing DEI, a set of DEI principles and infrastructure for the first time, you have to be mindful of the fact that folk already have a set of priorities. They have a set of initiatives they're already pushing within their organizations, particularly the business leaders, right? And if you truly want to work at embedding DEI across the business, and you're not the only DEI champion at the company, you got to keep pushing. And fatigue will set in. There'll be other challenges and curveballs. And at the end of the day, I think you just have to settle on the fact that you have to push and compete for mindset, even when the intentions are good among the leadership team.
Thank you for that. Aman, what's been your experience?
Yeah, I just had, there's a friend of mine who we've had a chance to do some work with named Torn Ellis. And he says often that, DE&I is just another word for good recruiting or good internal mobility, or like our definitions of what our processes should be should actually just encapsulate these concepts, right? That there isn't like diverse recruiting and then recruiting, or diverse opportunity and then opportunity. That like they're really one and the same thing. And how do we converge these conversations? And so we've really been trying to take that approach and too hard. The other thing I'd add is that, there's back to kind of the open palm approach and listening, you learn about different nuances and intricacies across, the country and the globe. I think, for example, as a global organization, racism may show up differently in the UK or in India than it does here. And I think we have to really be open to what, recently we had folks in our office in Bangalore, for example, witness a Muslim being beaten outside of the building, right? And so like when we talk about these conversations, just making sure that we're really keeping an open mind about like on the ground in someone's neighborhood, what does racism look like there, right? Not necessarily just our definition of it in Indianapolis or San Mateo or all in these communities. And I think it's, once you really start listening, I'll tell you, it can get a little overwhelming because it just feels like, man, we're fighting a fight on every single front. And so I think for me, it's been about trying to personalize it. So like you can get caught up in how challenging it is to kind of move the needle, or you can, pick up the phone and talk to somebody, right? And really, kind of, build the bridge, just kind of one piece at a time. And I think just that's been so important. So what we try to do is, when we started our process, like a lot of it was a share, I would share my personal experiences with leadership team or have our leaders talk about their perspectives. And I think, racism is an interesting thing because there are many people, let's talk about kind of American culture for a minute. There are many people that have not seen it because of where they grew up. Like they just didn't see the subtle, quiet, they've seen the outcome of it, the output of it, but they didn't live it in their classroom growing up, right? Maybe in a rural part of the country. And I think there's just, there's so much to unpack in these conversations. And once you get people in the same room and they can talk about, well, hey, let me tell you literally, let me tell you what I saw in my 6th grade classroom, right? And just getting all those stories out on the table so we can really, really ground ourselves in how the depth of the challenge and the problem. But what I'd say is like, it's a fine balance between getting caught up in the, kind of solving for world hunger versus going and feeding one person. Do you know what I mean? And I think we got to do both kind of at the same time. I think if you're only kind of thinking about it at the world hunger level, it's hard to take action. But if you just go say, hey, who could I go feed right now? Right? Like who could I go help right now? I think it's as us working together to go find that fine balance.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of really great points. And two that I want to circle back to, making DEI a part of your organization's DNA. So it has to be a part of the way that you just do business. It's not something that's extra. It's not the cherry on top. It's there to stay and how you operate 100% of the time. I love that you brought that up. Thank you for that. And then meeting people where they are. I know that's been a common theme as we've been having this discussion, but meeting people where they are on their journey. And as I like to say, pushing them one step further. So I absolutely love that. Okay, Miranda, what are your thoughts? What are some of the things that you do to get your leaders on board?
I would say that the words culture fit need to be stricken from every organization's vocabulary when it comes to the, for lack of a better word, the cultish experience of that, because culture fit indicates a homogenous work environment. And so, sorry. And so I've had conversations.
Siri wants to be an anti-racist.
I'm sorry.
Said Siri wants to be an anti-racist.
I know, she's very involved. She's very nosy. But so I've had conversations with leaders here recently when having, we'll call it issues is probably a strong word, but working through personnel issues with folks of different cultures or backgrounds or what have you. And they'll say, I'm getting feedback, they're not a culture fit. I'm like, you're right, they're not, they're culture additive. We need to have a conversation about what attributes they're bringing to our culture to enhance it. And that may be different and that may rub people the wrong way, but when you go and talk to someone and you approach them and say, I'm getting this feedback, I want to talk to you about that very frankly, And let's talk about how we build relationships with other people so that when you have those hard conversations or those culture conflicts, whatever they may be, as Marsha said earlier, you're meeting a person where they are. You're not expecting them to fit into a box. I think that changes the conversation, and it changes leaders' ability to coach people who may be brought in to stir things up a little bit.
I want to piggyback on that. I think there's a point of intersectionality between what Miranda was saying and what Aman was saying about how do you give feedback to an employee who may fall into a certain underrepresented group or a certain different cultural background if you yourself has never really been exposed to what that culture is and how individuals in that culture operate, how they talk, how they maneuver. And one of the things that we're being very intentional about at Genesys is directly focusing on outfitting our leaders with the toolkit of how to give constructive feedback in an unbiased way, right? How to understand biases that may come into play during the performance management life cycle, and how, if you're having challenges with a particular individual, how to not just default to the fact, oh, well, this individual isn't a cultural fit, but to be open to understanding if the performance is there. And there's no question that the person is performing well, but there's just something about your conversations that go south from time to time. Maybe we need to explore why and understand how to outfit our leaders and our managers who may, to Aman's point earlier, has never even been exposed to this, to help them understand why. So we're very intentional about that at Genesys as part of our level up packaging, which is a learning and development solution that we use to continue to evolve our leaders. And to Marsha's point about embedding it in everything you do, now we're embedding DEI concepts around unconscious biases and stereotyping into that level up so that it becomes a part of what we're doing in the business, and it's not some outside program, if you will.
And I agree with that completely, Eric, and educating. So finding those intersections or those spaces where there's an opportunity to do, we don't use the word training, and at our school, it's education and development. And what are those opportunities to learn more about, to develop cultural competence? Doing something in the beginning to assess cultural competence, and then after a series of learning and development or education development, what's the post? How are we doing over time? And so I know that's time consuming, but there may be opportunities around generational intelligence. There may be around things that we can learn from individuals from different backgrounds and different situations that may be different than what we've experienced. And how do we bring everyone else along through education, educating ourselves and educating the individuals who work alongside those individuals who come from different backgrounds than us. And hey, we come from different backgrounds, and we call it your story, who have different stories than us. How do we all come together to learn more so that we can have a productive environment?
I'll add one thing, one technique that we utilize, it's a little bit of maybe too much detail, but if it's the opposite of what Eric said. Let's say we are having a performance challenge. One of the things we'll do first is we'll actually convene a group of leaders, and we'll talk, like on the senior management team, we'll actually talk first about what structural roadblocks could we be creating to this person's success, right? And really and what's great about the group conversation is what is it about? It's about exposing blind spots, right? That vertical chain of management might have through people who don't really have a stake in the game outside of just making it a great place to work and grow, right? And so we have those conversations, behind the scenes, and there are learnings that we have. And sometimes we talk about, there's just stuff about, there's an adjacent opportunity, or there's, we need to take a different approach in how we articulate, performance feedback to this person. And so I think part of about being an anti-racist is taking those extra steps of, what could we be doing structurally that's actually inhibiting this person's success versus, this person's doing everything wrong, right? And I think that's an important step that we take. So I'd encourage everybody to take this kind of group lens approach for the purpose of exposing blind spots. And if you need to go as far as saying, hey, I need someone on this team in this group conversation to actually take the contrarian approach, like think about this through that employee's lens and articulate what could be getting in this person's way. And so that's what I believe it's those actions that really are going to help us get there.
Awesome. Thank you all so very much. We can definitely continue this conversation, but now it's time for us to move into some group discussions. So these group discussions are based on topics that we received from you during the registration process. So each of the panelists and myself will be leading these discussions, and we have a few questions that are going to help us guide this conversation. There will also be a TechPoint team member in each room to take notes so that we can compile all of these aha moments that we have and share them with you all after today's session. So here's what I need you to do. I want you to leave this Zoom call and go back to the Spaces platform in your web browser. Click on the main page and scroll down and choose whatever breakout discussion you'd like to join. We're gonna be in these breakout sessions for about 15 minutes. So I need you to choose your breakout session quickly so that we can get started. We're gonna come back here at 9:40. So make sure you come back so that we could wrap up and hear from our panelists on one final thing. So choose your breakout sessions and we'll be back here at 9:40. Again, if you have any questions or have any issues, be sure to contact Anna Rao in the Spaces platform. So we'll see you all back here shortly. All right, so welcome back, everyone. I know that breakout session went really, really fast. It went really fast in mine, I know for sure, but I hope that you had an opportunity to learn something new. Before we close out today's session with the final word from our panelists, I hope that you've marked your calendars for the next 2 sessions in the series. So we're going to put a link in the chat section for the intersectionality session, which is going to be next week, and the Going Beyond Metrics session that's going to be the week after. Register for those, share it with your network. We want to get as many people into these free sessions as possible, so please join us for that. And if you enjoyed today, you're going to love what we have coming up next, so be sure to come back for that. And I want to close out by asking our panelists one final question. And Miranda, I'm going to start with you. What is your go-to resource related to diversity, equity, and inclusion that you'd like to share with the group?
Yeah, so my go-to resource that I thought was a really great way to objectively look at your policies and procedures and your hiring tactics, it's called the Social Justice Opportunity Navigator. And you go in, it's a survey essentially, and you answer a bunch of questions, and it actually gives you a red, yellow, green on the areas within your business that you could focus on first. It sets some priorities for you, so it takes some of that guesswork out. And we actually invited other members of our leadership team to use it as well, just to kind of compare and contrast. And it was a great sort of first step to getting started, if you will. I'll include a link.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you so much. Aman?
I think, for me, it's really been, people, and specifically like my team members, our associates, our employees, they in so many ways keep me honest. They keep me, they expose blind spots. They're, letting me, I just am able to kind of calibrate my thinking all the time, based off what I'm learning from conversations with our team. So that has been a great resource for me.
Great. Eric?
Yeah, I have several. When I started this journey, because I pivoted from the business into the role, not being a seasoned practitioner in this space, I reached out to other chief diversity officers. And what I found is folk are very willing to share their experiences. They're very willing to share their knowledge, is what has worked well for them, what hasn't. And, I kind of put my old sales hat on and started cold calling folk and reaching out to people on LinkedIn. And I was like, hey, I'm not selling anything, just looking for an opportunity to connect, and got some really great responses. And from that has formed kind of a little mini coalition of chief diversity officers. And we get together once a month and we exchange on ideas and practices and what's working and what's not working in our own environments. And then the other key resource for me are employees, similar to what Aman was saying. I mean, if you Yeah, we have launched 3 emerging we call them inclusion groups. I think they're known generally as employee resource groups, but we intentionally call them inclusion groups at Genesys. But we launched 3 emerging groups here, and using Aman's term earlier, it was an open hand approach. It was very grassroots driven. They were not shy at sharing their lived experiences, and if you listen, there's a lot of valuable insights that you can tap into that you can use to build your strategic framework. And I go back to that well very often when running by different strategies against them, bouncing different ideas off of them, because there's a level of authenticity that it infuses into your overall framework. And then on top of that, you get a sense of how the employee base will actually respond to what you're doing. So those are really 2 of my top go-tos.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And unfortunately, we didn't get Marsha back, but we'll be sure to follow up with her to get her top resources. We are going to share as many resources that were mentioned today, plus more with you all following today's session. So be on the lookout for that and the recording in your email shortly. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope to see you next week, and have a great day, everyone. Thanks.